Well, welcome to the Father Show, and I'm your host, Mike Thompson. Today we have another fantastic show for you. But before we get to that, if you have not subscribed to the Father Show with Mike Thompson YouTube channel, I would ask that you would go and subscribe to our show. And while you're there, hit that notification bell so that way every week when we have a show, you'll be notified. Also, if you are a man and you're looking for resources, go to the Father Show with MikeThompson.com, click on resources, and there you will find national and statewide resources that can provide you the information that you may be looking for. If you can't find what you're looking for and you still need some information, please write me at thefathershow@gmail.com and let me know what it is that you need, and I will definitely try my best to find that information for you. And if you have a particular show that you would like for us to do, a particular subject matter that you would like for us to discuss, please go to thefathershow@gmail.com, let us know, and we'll do our best to find that information and a person that can bring you the best information for you, and even see you an email back to let you know when that show is going to air. But if you subscribe, you already know. All right, so today let's get started. I have a fantastic guest for you today, and his name is Ed Frauenheim, and Ed is a co-author of Reinventing Masculinity. And I really want to get into this one because he has some great ideas and some new ideas about masculinity. All right. So let's get started real quick. And Ed, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, Mike. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. I'm glad to have you on the show. But before we really dive into the questions, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a father of two teenagers. I live in San Francisco. My son is 19 and my daughter is 17. I am a writer by trade, you might say. Was a journalist for many years. More recently, I've been focused on workplace culture topics, and I've co-written 4 books. Most of them were about work and corporate culture, but the last one was called Reinventing Masculinity, the liberating power of compassion and connection. And that's where I kind of learned what I was learning about men at work, combined forces with a psychologist named Ed Adams, and we really talked about how men are really called to show up differently in all aspects of life, including as fathers today.
Yeah. And that is really important. You know, the paradigm on men has definitely changed, and how we evolved and working between work and home has definitely changed as well. But how do you describe masculinity?
Well, I think we're in a time of changing definitions of masculinity, actually,
Mm-hmm.
Mike. For thousands of years, I would say, not for all of human history, but for the last 10,000 years or so, we've had what my co-author Ed and I call a confined definition of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by confined is that we've been very limited in how we can relate to others and in the roles that we are sanctioned to play. In other words, it's okay to be a provider, a protector, a conqueror, and there's room for those things being valid at different times, but not necessarily okay to do things like be a caregiver or a spiritual seeker. Those were kind of shunned kind of roles, or
Mm-hmm.
mocked even by men. And when in terms of relating to people, we're mostly supposed to show up as a competitor, to be ready to best those around us. Also supposed to be pretty stoic and unemotional in how we respond and react to people, and also supposed to be self-reliant, all the way to the point of being isolated. And so this has been the dominant masculinity that's been around for, as I said, kind of since the dawn of the agricultural era. But it's becoming outdated. It's becoming ever clear that it's unhealthy. It's dangerous for the world in a lot of ways, and it's not really a positive thing for anybody around men if you only stick within this confined this box that some people call it, the man box, including in the way we show up as fathers.
Because you're right, we all try to put a man in a box. And really individuals, whether it's your ethnicity or your religion or your whoever you are, you're gonna say, okay, you're a man. So okay, here's what a man looks like. This is the box. And I personally don't like being put in a box. You can't define me. And I think a lot of men, especially the younger men, the younger generation, because they are really changing the paradigm of what a man looks like.
Yeah.
We've had a show where we had a father that is a stay-at-home father on the show. In my generation and older, that was unheard of.
Yeah.
So
I think I agree with you. And thank you. That idea of the stay-at-home dad is a real change from the past, and I think that confined way of being a man really kind of told us to be stern and stoic fathers, right? Like, and also, also could say disconnected and distant. We're not supposed to be spending that much time with our kids. There's something wrong with us if we're not out, bringing home the bacon, and if we're going to be really emotionally close and connected to our kids. That's weird, as a man, as a dad, going in previous generations. The kind of masculinity that we're excited to see emerging, that my co-author Ed and I found, is what we call liberating masculinity. And by that we mean it's a way of having more choices, being free to show up in a lot of different ways, not just those first three roles of the provider, protector, conqueror, but say also the caregiver, whether it's a nurse, whether it is a stay-at-home father, also being able to show up, say, as someone who's interested in introspection and spiritual exploration. That was not really typically a manly role, a real man role, but we're making space for that now. And in terms of how we relate to each other, we're allowed to be emotionally expressive, allowed to be vulnerable even with our peers and with our loved ones, with our coworkers, and along with that, to acknowledge that we are interconnected. We're interdependent, not these islands onto ourselves that we would like to think we are. Yeah. So those are some of the ways that this new masculinity, this liberating masculinity, is showing up. And as it relates to fathers, it's allowing dads to be more emotionally attuned to their kids, more expressive, more loving, really, when it comes down to it. And I think that's a positive thing for fathers.
Well, I couldn't argue with you on that one. I mean, the benefit that the kids have when your father is more involved in their life is huge. And studies have come up and shown that when a father is engaged with his kids, it helps them, keeps them out of prison, keeps them from dropping out of school, keeps the young girl from getting pregnant too early, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's nothing but a benefit for the father to be more engaged with his kids. But let me ask you. No.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, let me ask you.
Well, I was just going to say the benefit is two-way, because you're mentioning all the benefits to the kids, but there's also benefits to the dads. A lot of the earlier, older men, fathers who were told, you're not supposed to have a close relationship. You're supposed to be the disciplinarian, and keep your kids at a distance, almost an arm's length distance. Well, those dads, when they get older, or they're closer to death, say they might really regret not having that close, emotionally rich relationship. And I know we have a story in a book with a guy that just was feeling awful about having been estranged from his daughter, not ever really trying to be close with her. And thanks to being part of a men's group, that was run by my co-author, he was encouraged to, reconnect with her, and that was so meaningful for him. So the benefits, to your point, are to the kids, but they're also a benefit to the father, who can have a much richer life and experience as a dad.
Because I would have to agree, because I think human beings in general want affection and want to be loved. And if you are keeping your kids off to a distance, you're not really receiving that love from anyone. Maybe your wife, possibly. But, even back in the day, like when my father and my grandfather, even the wife was kept at a distance. You didn't embrace them as we do today, and as you see younger men doing. And they're being more, you see them walking down the street holding hands. You see them carrying a baby. You see a lot more involvement that men are doing today. And it's really a good thing to see. But I know it's going to take a while to really get to that. And as a grandfather, I think kind of what you were saying, men, when we get older, we realize that maybe it's the grandkids that makes you open up your eyes, that you want that affection, you want that love. And you look at your kids, and your kids are like, hey, well, you were never there for me. So yeah.
I think you're right, Mike. And I'm glad to say my own father kind of softened as he got older. He often was the stern disciplinarian guy, and could have a temper also. But he really kind of came to treasure the relationships he has with my brother and sister and me. And the research on happiness and well-being is pretty clear. It's not the money, it's not necessarily the achievements in life that a lot of dads focus on to, rise up the corporate ladder. The long-standing study out of Harvard about happiness and well-being indicates that the most important thing is relationships.
Right.
And the people that when they're 80, when they're best able to navigate aches and pains of old age, what mattered was how the relationships, how strong their relationships were when they're 50. Yeah. Do they have strong relationships? Then they can weather these slings and arrows of life. And it's a shame when guys kind of feel like they can't have a relationship even with the members of their own family. But that's the conditioning many of us had. And to your point, thankfully, it's changing.
Yeah. And so how can more men get more liberated in their masculinity? Because we've done a show about being vulnerable, and we know that's a hard thing for men to be. But how do you would suggest a man that is trying to be better and being his best version of himself be more liberating?
Great question, Mike. And we have a formula, you might say, that we came up with based on the research and in our interviews and thinking about how do you move men to this newer, more enriching approach to being a man. And we came up with the 5 C's. So there's 5 things we would suggest, and they all start with C. And the first one is curiosity, and that has to do with asking more questions. That we're often told as men, don't ask a question because you look stupid. But if we can get in touch with our curiosity, like what we had when we were kids, why is the sky blue? How do airplanes fly? And can we have, is this all our life is? Could I have a better relationship with my kids? Do I really need to show up with so much anger if I do? So that's the curiosity one. The next one's related. It's courage. And that's not just the courage that men are used to in the physical realms or in the financial realms, but also in the emotional realms. Are we willing to acknowledge that maybe we have some wounds in the way we were parented? And do we have the courage to tell our kids how much we love them? Make ourselves vulnerable in those ways you were talking about. Even to acknowledge we don't have all the answers. That takes courage in a world where we're supposed to be the smartest guy in the room. So curiosity, courage, and then compassion has to do with understanding another's feelings, and if they're suffering, trying to alleviate that suffering. that's such a basic part of being a father, a parent. But men are often told to put that compassion work onto their wife, right? Let
Mm-hmm.
your mom take care of you if you got a boo-boo or you're hurting. I'll handle like teaching you how to play ball and maybe some intellectual activities. But men owning and accepting that compassion, that isn't just, there is compassion around providing for your family. That there's certainly men love their families, but it hasn't often been explicit in acknowledging it out loud. And then the next one is connection, related to the compassion one of really taking the bonds you have with others seriously, and not trying to be that rock all by yourself. It's a myth.
Yeah.
We're all interdependent. We breathe the same air. We eat food of the same earth. And we need each other to survive and to thrive, as that research from Harvard showed. And the last one is commitment, which is sticking with it, because it's hard to make a change. I've wrestled with that myself in terms of trying to be a less angry and more, caring father. I've had to acknowledge that my own anger and temper problems have a lot to do with sadness and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Anger is often a mask. Maybe you've talked about this, Mike, before, a mask for sadness or fear. And, it just takes work and commitment to saying, every time I'm mad, what am I really afraid of? Or am I really sad about something that I'm not even acknowledging?
Yeah. I was talking with a guest before, and he made me realize that the anger I had when I was in my early teenage years was based off because my dad passed away, because he died when I was 13. And I used to get so angry, and I had no idea why I was that angry. But something could set me off, and it wouldn't take a whole lot to do it.
Yeah. Do you think it was a sadness behind that?
I think it was because, my dad was in the military, so he always taught me that, when he went away, you're the man of the house. And so I have very few, because he was always off fighting a war. He wasn't home a lot, but I have some great memories. The memories I do have the time that he was home, we really had a great time. And great. I know that passed down from me to my kids, but I was thankful that the time that I got to spend with them. But when he passed, I had to grow up. And I had to take care of my older sister and my mom. In my mind now, my mother wasn't one of those people that says, wait till your daddy gets home. She has something to deal with. She dealt with it right then and there.
Okay.
So I didn't really have to take it, but in my mind, my dad put that there. You have to be the head of the household when I'm gone. And it was there. And I know a lot of men have been told that as they were growing up, and that can put a lot of burden on a young man if that's the case.
Yeah, it really can. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that story, Mike, and sorry about that loss of your dad at an early age. And that weight, I think, is something we don't acknowledge as men.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't acknowledge how we may be stressed or hurt or exhausted, it does come out in these negative ways. It often comes out in terms of drinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out in terms of temper tantrums.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out in terms of some men turn to pornography or affairs to just get a
some other addiction
dose of some addiction. Yeah, because we aren't really trained. It's changing, but in our generations, I'm 54. You look like you're in that territory. Maybe we were told you don't talk about your emotions, and the dad has got to be the sort of rock of the family. That is, it's an unrealistic expectation that was never even healthy in the first place.
Yeah, and that's might be realistically why men die before women do, because we hold everything inside and we don't have an opportunity to let that anger, let that problem come out and discuss it and get it off your chest, as they say.
I think you're right. I mean, that lack of friendship is a big part of it also, that we won't build friendships where we can talk about these things with close friends. I've tried to developed some of these friendships. I'm really blessed to have some really close guy friends along with some women friends as well. But I don't know how I would handle life if I couldn't be talking about some of the problems I've had along the way with close friends. So I think you're right about that. Holding stuff in is a big problem. And I would say it's also a problem when we parent. If we're not really able to share our own vulnerabilities and things we're not sure of with our kids, it sends this message that you have to be perfectly put together all the time.
Yeah.
Especially to send that message to the boys anyways, if they're looking up to their dads and want to be like them.
Yeah, and as parents, we got to realize we are in a situation, especially when you're a first time parent, you're in a situation that you have no clue is what you're doing. And it's not, you could have been around kids, but every kid is different. You can have two kids and from the same mother and father, and they can just be on the opposite end of the spectrum. One's going to act one way, one's going to act another way. I just saw an article the other day about twin girls, and they were like Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde. One was great, one was terrible. And they were twins and looked very much alike. But I think, too, if we're talking about liberating masculinity, how do we get this across to the women? Because generally, women are going to look at a man as their dad was. If they had their father in their life, they're going to be looking for that type of man. And if the father was more of a hands-off, and you're going to be looking for that, you're not going to be able to find it if you come across a man that has been liberated in his masculinity, and that's going to be kind of like bumping heads. How can we get that information across?
It's a great question, Mike. I appreciate you asking about that. It's a tricky issue. On the one hand, I don't want women to feel like they have a responsibility to free men from that older masculinity. That liberation, I think, it's on the shoulders of us as men to evolve. But women can play a big role in it. And to exactly your point, if a woman, if a wife or a girlfriend, makes fun of a man who's trying to be a more expressive father, say, or who's expressing their own vulnerabilities, who may be, acknowledging that they don't have all the answers, and the man gets that message of being shamed for it, that's going to slow them down. It's going to make them shut down. And on the other hand, if a woman is kind of encouraging that behavior and appreciative, if the dad is getting down on his hands and knees and having a tea party with his daughter, being that loving, expressive dad and telling the kids that he loves them, and that is celebrated by the woman, that's just going to fuel that man, fuel that father to keep going and become, with this liberating father. We use the word liberating because we talk about how it's not just that the man is liberating himself from those old ways, but when men are doing this, they liberate everybody around them, because it gives women more options to be themselves. It gives kids, options to be themselves as opposed to feeling like they have to be on perfect behavior around dad, or else they're going to be, maybe hit even with corporal punishment, or you're giving more choices to people around you when you show up in this liberating way as a man and as a father.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, I have an example that when you have to be out of the box, especially with parenting, and my issue was parenting, because when my son was a baby and we were potty training him and he was growing up from that point, I come from a disciplinary background, and, my mom was disciplinary, and my dad would, and my grandmother, and my aunts, and my uncles, you name it. But when it came to him, I had to learn, because disciplining him with a spanking like a swap on the butt meant nothing. He would look at you like, what, that it? That's all you got? But if you sit down and talk to him, that's a whole different story. It really got to him just when I sit down and say, okay, look, this is not going to work and blah, 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 and whatever. And that really changed me and, in a sense, liberated me, because I ain't never touched that boy since. You know, it was just, I looked at it and looked at the response that I was getting and how he was being disciplined. It was like, okay, that's not working. So let's try this.
Yeah. Good for you. My story around those lines is like, for my daughter could be so strong-willed, Mike. There were times I was carrying her around like a football, and she's just kicking and screaming. And, you know, it wasn't that effective to try to control her like physically like that. But she would it's much bigger deal for her to be forced to talk to my wife and me than to have any kind of, you know, physical punishment or grounding. Like, it's the worst to have to talk to mom and dad, but that's when some of the progress happens, I think. So yeah, I really am in favor of nonviolent parenting. And I think it takes evolution on the part of a lot of us guys to adopt it and to see that it can work, and it actually fits in with a more loving, deeply compassionate approach to parenting.
Yeah, I agree with you, because if you can, and that's part of that masculinity, and that's one reason I brought it up, because if you were taught you have to be strong, be the disciplinarian in the household, what does that mean? You know, what does that look like? You know, and you don't have no choice but to draw back on what you got when you were growing up. So we've got to learn different ways to be better fathers and dealing with this masculinity. But a key component of it is going to be how the women respond to it.
Yeah, and I feel real lucky to have a partner, and my wife, Rowena, who's really supported me along the way. And we try to be really, you know, on the same page with our parenting. And she has encouraged me to go to that, like anger. I went to an anger management class. When I talked about my daughter a second ago, and at one point I was like, you need an anger management class, to my daughter. And she's like, you do too, Dad. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm going to go. I'm going to take an anger management class. And I learned a lot, actually. But my wife did not mock me for that. You know, she was not like, why you're a man. A real man doesn't need an anger management class. A real man is angry sometimes, you know. You know, she was, get past that anger. She knew that it was not healthy for our family, for me to have anger, or for my daughter to have anger, you know, a lot of expressed anger. So I think you're right that women can make a huge difference in us as guys that are trying to be the best dads we can be.
Yeah. Because if the woman can support us to be, you know, reinventing that masculinity and being more open, being more caring, because, you know, you hear women say, I wish he would talk more, or I wish he would do this more, and I wish he would do that more. But a lot of times a man won't do it because of fear of how she really is going to feel.
Yeah, I think that you put your finger on it there, I think. We can ask for women to be as advanced as we are trying to be. You know, it takes work for them also to kind of get past those old stereotypes, and to really, make space for a man who's going to cry, a man who's going to, not have all the answers, as we talked about, or to, admit some fears. So I think you're definitely right there.
And masculinity, I know, is, like you mentioned, a protector. We definitely will protect. And I know I have a wife similar to yours. She lets me be me. But I do know I'm a lot like her father. That I've seen, I've watched him, and she's told me, even the way we think sometimes is a lot alike. So, but she doesn't, I know some women say, okay, you gotta be able to build a house, be more mechanically inclined. And
Yeah.
if you're not, some women will look at you like, you're not masculine, you're soft.
Yeah.
So, how will we get men to be able to be masculine, but still, as you mentioned, vulnerable and soft, and because I think you can still
Yeah.
be courageous and still be a protector without losing your masculinity.
I agree. I think that a key message along those lines is that you don't have to go all the way and throw out the baby with the bathwater, if you will. You don't, in terms of this idea of being a liberating man, you can still be a protector and a provider, even a conqueror when there might be occasions for it. But you're also going to be taking on these additional roles.
Mm-hmm.
One of them might be, a nonviolence peacemaker. And I think about like the work of Martin Luther King or Mohandas Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. Those fellas were incredibly brave, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're putting their bodies on the lines. And I was thinking about this with the Ukraine situation recently, and could there be a nonviolent resistance to Putin and Russia in Ukraine? And what Gandhi has said is nonviolence is the summit of bravery, or something along those lines, because it's not running away; it's being in the line of trouble and potentially at harm, but knowing that is you're standing up for an important cause and you're not willing to hurt somebody else along the way. That is a way of protecting, say, in a way that's new. It's promoting peace because you're not exacerbating the battle,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not cowardly by any means.
Yeah. And do you think that Putin is trying to exert his masculinity by taking on this war?
I think that's probably part of it, Mike. And you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. Like, he likes to show himself in these conventional masculine poses, like being a judo champion or riding a horse with his shirt off. He's like
Mm-hmm.
focused on his muscles and this kind of domineering way of operating in the world at this point, like killing innocent civilians, babies,
Yeah.
in recent days. And that's a very a super confined approach to masculinity with very little compassion, very little connection beyond his immediate circle or sense of Russia as a fallen empire.
Mm-hmm.
We need men today to connect to all people, not just your own tribe, not just your own nation or your own race. We
Yeah.
need to connect to everybody, because if we don't see ourselves as all part of this planet Earth, this spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller talked about it, we're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
So I do think that an old school, dominant, violent, stoic, and self-reliant to an extreme version of masculinity, a confined masculinity, is behind some of this violence in Ukraine.
Yeah. And you wrote a book about reinventing masculinity. And what made you came up with that idea about reinventing masculinity? What brought on that book?
For me, one of the reasons was my research into workplaces. I was studying leadership. I was studying really the best workplaces in America and across the world at an organization called Great Place to Work, which surveys employees and does research. And what we were noticing is that effective leaders today are not like that old barking boss that was domineering and belittling of others, seeking to rise up the organization by them, even if it meant putting on other people along the way. But instead, they were people that build bonds of trust. They were humble. They also were very purpose driven. So not necessarily about profit driven or accumulating wealth. It was like, what's the highest purpose of this organization, and how do I inspire people with that? So really, leadership is becoming a different ball game, and the old way of being a man is a losing approach. So that was the angles I was taking. But I was also drawn to this idea because the old rules of being a man didn't fit me very well. I grew up
Mm-hmm.
skinny. I lost my one fist fight. I wasn't rising through the corporate ranks to the top right away. I'm a sensitive guy who
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of female friends and, questioning competition. So I just was concerned about the way we were, forcing guys to be, in part because I didn't fit that very well. And lastly, I was concerned about the world. I think that the attitude you saw in Putin, the attitude you see in some U.S. politicians too, where we think we're all on our own. We don't have to worry about the environment we're polluting, and about the global climate changes we're contributing to. These are all really dangerous attitudes at this moment. So for all these reasons, my co-author and I were ready to talk about how we could reinvent masculinity for today.
Yeah, because it really does need to be reinvented. And I agree with you. We as a world need to come together. We all breathe the same air. We all bleed the same way. It doesn't matter that your skin color might be different than mine, lighter, darker, tanner, whatever. It doesn't matter because we're still human beings. We still got feelings. We were born. All of us was born. All of us will die, and we all will turn back into dust when we die after a while. So there's no difference in me and you. Now, we might have different ideas, and that's fine. We might have different cultures, and that's fine. I myself, I love food, and I love food from all cultures. I love learning about different foods from different cultures. My wife and I, when we travel, she said, "Oh, I want to go see this and I want to go see that." And I'm like, "No, I want to eat. Let's go find, let's go find the best place
Love
to
it.
eat. Something authentic. I don't want, something that I can get at home. I'm not going to go to Japan and have a McDonald's hamburger. Really?
Right.
No, I can do that at home. I want something different." And so I think we all have to learn that, when you're trying to be masculine and you're trying to be strong, you're trying to be brave, you're trying to show courage and all those things that go with masculinity, you still got to have a good heart. And we still got to learn to work together because just like now, you and I are talking. You got some great ideas. You're teaching me something that's going to make me a better man.
I'm flat honored, Mike, and same way. You're sharing a lot of great ideas with me and other fathers as well. So kudos to what you've been up to and the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. But unfortunately, that's going to be our time. We are really running short. But I wanted you to tell the audience how they can, one, find your book, and two, if you take calls or, for speaking engagements or just to talk to another man about masculinity, whatever you do, I'd like for you to tell the audience so they can know more,
Sure.
a little bit more how to get a hold of you and what you do.
Thanks for that invitation, Mike. Yep, people can reach me through LinkedIn. I also have a website, edfrauenheim.com. You can find our book at reinventingmasculinity.com. Also, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or your local bookstore can order it for you if you want. So, I'm happy to have conversations about these ideas around a different, better, reinvented masculinity, and give talks, workshops, and conversations with one-on-one conversations as well.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Ed, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. It has definitely been an honor to talk with you and share this time with you. And I love what you wrote about. And I personally want to get that book myself because I do see a change. And I really hope that a lot of men will start changing and realize what masculinity is not in this box. You can be authentic yourself and still be masculine. And I want to tell the women out there, you make a big point and a big reason why that man can or cannot be who he really is. You really hold a lot of that in there because he's going to be trying to please you. He's not going to tell you that, but he's trying to please you.
That's true. Well, Mike, thanks for that wisdom, and thanks very much for having me on the show.
You're welcome. And Ed, thank you so much. And I really look forward to talking with you again. And, if you come up with some more books, please, especially masculinity or especially something for men, I definitely like for you to get in touch with me and we can promote it here on the show.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for today. And I really want to thank Ed for coming on the show and providing that information and talking about his book, Reinventing Masculinity, and what that means, what that looks like. Because the man of yesterday is just that, yesterday. The man of today, we need to be better and we need to do better. And as I've said on this show many a times, we are the first example that our kids and our grandkids and our neighbor kids see. So we got to be the best version of ourselves as much as we can. And the only way to do that is through knowledge. I can't expect you or anybody else can expect you to be better if you don't know how to be better, if you don't know the knowledge about being better. So here on the Father Show, that's what we do. And I thank Ed for bringing that information so that can help us be better men as we going forward. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go to the Father Show with Mike Thompson YouTube channel and click on that subscription bell. And while you're there, hit that notification bell so that way every week when we have a show, you'll know about it. And once again, if you are looking for resources and you are looking for things that can help you or your family or a family member, please go to the Father Show with MikeThompson.com. Click on resources, and there you will find national and statewide resources that are available for you. And it's free. It doesn't cost you a thing, and there's no cookies. We don't even know you were there. We just want you to get the information that you need when you need it and use it for your best ability. All right. So until next week, thank you for joining us here on the Father Show, and I hope you the best and send you all my love, and God bless you all. And I can't wait to see you again next week.